Good morning, everybody. How y'all doing? It's been a while. It's been a couple of weeks, maybe. So I'm gonna welcome you back to World of Kebalan Roots and Culture African History class. Roots and Culture African History class. Excuse me, I had to get my seat right. Hopefully, everybody's doing well. You enjoying the nice weather or the winter weather wherever you are. We welcome you back. We are always in the process of building community. And so when you don't see me, I'm in the community building something, creating something because we are definitely planning for the summer months coming up. We have quite a few programs prepared for you. Why? Because we are always focused on the rise of the African, which is our social media Pan-African movement. We've been reaching out to the community, more individuals in our community. We're reaching out to individuals in the greater community to bring you as many presentations and information and Afro education, which is an Afrocation. I had somebody in my community send me a text and was like, Afrocation? Yes, which is a combination of it's an African centered curriculum. African centered curriculum, because we are seeking to make sure that we are able to give as much information as possible and more precise, closer to the truth of what we're working on as a people, our history, where we come from, who we are, some of our traditions and cultures, and just different aspects of being African people and the diaspora. So I thank you for coming. I am uh, not the expert. I am a Malakio, and that word means seeker of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. And I share the wisdom and knowledge and understanding as I learn it, I share it. Um, so we ask you to continue to come along in this trip, because not only are we focused on giving you African history, but we have several other programs. So at any given time, if you are watching right now on Facebook, please hit the like button, comment, and share. So this creates an algorithm within our community that allows it to be set upon. It is like leafletizing, what we used to call. It goes out to individuals who are like-minded and on your friends list, as well as, if you like it, please hit subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, hit subscribe and the notification bell. At this particular time, I checked. We had some issues with the website recently, which I had to really focus on, and I'm checking it now, and we are literally live via the website. We are live via Facebook. We are live via YouTube. We are live via a couple of other locations. And so, anytime, click like, comment, and share. Subscribe, be a friend. Share it with a friend, because we have multiple programs throughout the week. Tomorrow we'll have Kebalan Inspirational Sunday. On Tuesdays we have the African Speaks, which is a more of not a young adult conversation about just black reality. There we go. And then we have After Stream. I'm gonna put out a flyer this week about all the up and coming topics for this week. We have After Stream on Thursday nights, which is Pan African news from a Pan African perspective. All right. Now we're in African history class. Our Kebalan Roots and Culture African History class. And then after this class, we have the understanding of African spirituality. So again, please join us for our multiple classes. We are seeking to the now. Wait, where's this at? Okay. Um, today's topics, which is we're focusing on the ancient Egypt. We're focused on life in ancient Egypt. Now, Egyptian, we said that Egypt was a word given us by the Europeans. The actual location is called Kemet. And so from this point on, we're going to refer to it as Kemet. But in school or wherever you've learned the word of the names of the diaspora, which was changed, but it's actually Kemet. Okay, and so we're going to make sure that we dive into those. Some of the other one now, the we have developed this particular curriculum through something called the People's Library. Again, I'm not the expert. I am a Malakio, and I was voluntold by one of the elders in our community who actually teaches African history, and during COVID, he's developing a means to be able to teach a class that he does physically. He's working out so that he can do it via cyberspace. Now he's got all the technology the African has now. He's been got a long learning curve. He's working on it. He's got the data. He's got the skill set. So it's coming. Look for it. So it's coming. But to give you an idea of, not only did we pull it from the People's Library, which is 6 terabytes of African history. I believe the African history data now is up to 12 terabytes. Uh, so we pull that from there, as well as here are some books that I recommend in reference to gaining an understanding of African history and culture. Um, Before we continue, because it's been a minute since we jumped into this, so I'm not going to take too long in terms of the build up to from Kemet to Kush. If you've missed those, please take a look at the previous ones, and next week I promise to do a better recap. But we want to take the understanding, and goes from the book from Amos Wilson, that he teaches to manipulate history is to manipulate consciousness. The way a people thinks, not only the way they think, but in the way they see themselves in God, the way they see themselves in the world, the way they see themselves to themselves, and the way they see each other. It changes our consciousness if you can manipulate history. To manipulate somebody's consciousness is to manipulate their possibilities. Because when you can control the narrative of somebody else's history, you can control what they believe is possible through their genetic makeup, right? How they see themselves in God and how they see what they see physically. To manipulate their possibilities is to manipulate the power of who they are. Wow. And so this is why it's important that we have an Afrocation, an education from a African perspective. And that education yields two things. It yields the ability to navigate through global systematic oppression. Global systematic oppression. A lot of times we think that us in Americas, we are so self-centered, we believe that we're the only ones going through it. And so it's global. No, and so even dealing in the continent where you may no longer see colonial powers, that doesn't mean the mindset is not colonialized. And that's why we see a lot of rebellions on this side, according to what we get to see in terms of the propaganda, right? Media. So we don't always get to see truth. And so that's what they're doing, manipulating how powerful we really are. So what we want to do is and I said we were going to slow roast this thing. And I've been slow roasting it as much as possible, right? So we're going to slow roast it today, and then we're going to jump into it. I'm keeping the eyes on the clock because we want to get through this video. This is going to be the third time we actually play this up and coming, not the one that's coming now, but the up and coming video, where we get the historians discussing history. Yes, right. And so what we recapped on was the fact that Kemet is the cornerstone of every society, every modern society at this time. It is one of the cornerstones of society, and that's unspoken. You can even see it and if you go back to the previous class, you'll be able to see the information given how America is influenced by Kemet. And this is why they couldn't teach you that Kemet came from an African people. We can't teach you that Kemet is from Egypt is from an African people. We can't. Why? Because if we teach you that, we'd understand that we're raising an empire to be really mad at us, which is what we already are. We already should be. But we can't justify our treatment of second-class citizenship if we tell the world, if we don't control history, if we don't control the possibilities, if we don't control consciousness, we can't validate how we treat a great people who brought a great science, which is civilization, to the planet. The science of civilization. Wow, that's new. So then here we want to take a look at this next video. We want to take a look at what we call our architectonics, the the craftsmanship of what it looks like when you're building a a nation or a people or a process of praise, because that's all African nations were, a process of praise, because they were a spiritual people, especially in Kemet, a deep spiritual people. Deep spiritual people. A lot of their intelligence and wisdom came because of their surrendering to their higher power. So let's take a look at the architecture and realize that everything you see is made from your ancestors. Let's start the class. We want to revel in the intelligence, revel in the spiritual wisdom, revel in the communal societies, revel in the intellect, the ingenuity of one of the first and most powerful civilizations coming from an African people. This is your heritage. This is your birthright. This is your connection. This is your history. This is a piece of your identity of who you are in God and what you came to contribute to. What you came to contribute to modern society. And being able to see yourself in such beauty. You should be able to see yourself in such beauty today. Whether other people see it, it's not the issue. The question is, can you take time to see how great you were, to how great you are, to how great you will be? That's what knowing your history will do for you. It will open you up to the awareness of self, and it will show you the possibilities that was stolen from you. Yes, the wisdom that was stolen from you. There's a book called Stolen Legacy. Right. We have a legacy of building humanity across the globe. Woo, beautiful. And so they had to destroy it because another people didn't glow as well. All science, mathematics, arts, religion, spirituality, architecture, you name it, came out of African history, African wisdom, African ingenuity. That's that we talk about it in Alkebulan, Inspirational Sunday. That God particle, that dark chocolate human being. How much we were able to create and develop as a people, and how it affected and still affects the world. And we live more now into an age of information where we can deep dive into the knowledge of self so that we can find out who the Creator called us to be in this time. Because as a community, we brought this, not as individuals, but as a community. And as a community, we shall be able to do those things yet again as we move into the future. But before we move into the future, let's go into our lesson today and take a look at our past. As we take the time to study life in ancient Kemet, which is also Egypt. We were taking a look at a video between Rock Newman and the historian Anthony Bauer. I think I said his name right. And so we're going to pick up where we left off to get this information. I'm moving as quick as possible so we can get more of the video in instead of the last segments, because I'll talk all day. Let's go.
But I don't just read this information. I travel to the sources of the knowledge. So I've been to Kemet, I've been to Egypt, I've seen the documents myself. I've traveled to the Vatican. I've been to the Vatican Museum. This same information is in the Vatican Museum. I'm not saying anything that the average trained theologian doesn't already know.
Now, in that space where he said theologian, the last video they were talking about the identity of Jesus, the identity of the nation of Israel. and how important it is for us to understand that everybody else knows that that was an African people and it's an African history. And if you study history from an African perspective versus a European perspective, you get a total different meaning. A lot of time today, people talk about, well, why is it so important to understand the identity of a people, of Jesus? Easy. Because then that means the history and the perception, the interpretation changes when you have to add in African spirituality, African culture, African ways of life and traditions. When you add that in, you truly get a different interpretation, because now we are talking about communalism. We're talking about community. We're talking about brothers and sisters. It's not a faith of individuals, it's a faith of a people. The process is kingdom building, and kingdom building is self determination. That's the difference between a European perspective and an African perspective, historically. When you look at it historically, and he said, you don't take, I didn't just make this up. I had to go travel and see myself. Why? Because ain't no chains on us no more. So the brother could actually go. So when you start learning information, please know who you're learning the information from. Even if you're going, for those who have, we talk about mental health, learn who you're learning the information from. If individuals don't see you in the sight of God historically, of who, in terms of who we are as a people, they're not going to lead you to the right place. He said I had to go to the source myself. So I ain't taking it from nobody. I studied it, and he got his own books. Let's continue.
They learn this in divinity school. It just never filters down to the masses.
Well,
So this is not new information. People have known this knowledge for hundreds and hundreds of years. They've just been sitting
I
on
think
it.
I think the answer might be obvious, but I'm going to ask the question
Yes, sir.
anyhow. You said trained theologians.
Yes, sir.
They know this. If you go to the Vatican, you see the information that is there that
Yes,
you're
sir.
talking about, that you've seen on your many trips to Egypt.
Yes, sir.
But it doesn't filter down to the masses. Why?
Well, one of the main reasons is because people are controlled by fear.
before we get into that, understand that Israel traveled through Egypt. Israel traveled through Kemet. And so how can Israel travel the Nile, get into Kemet, travel out of Kemet across, and it be a African, knowing that what we know about history now, knowing that Egypt was an African people? How would not you not see the identity of Israel being in Egypt, where you could sit down and you can fade a baby, you can have a Moses can be in Egypt, and they not know that he's an Israelite? How you see that? Easy. They were all Africans. Let's continue.
And people are controlled by ignorance. And powerful people never teach powerless people how to take power away from them. That's a quote from Dr. John Henry Clark. And so people are controlled through politics, they're controlled through education, and they're controlled through religion. One of the best examples of that is African Americans. When we were stolen from our homeland in Africa and enslaved for over 444 years, the justification for that was that Africans had no soul. So people, Christians, could steal us, rape us, murder us, lynch us, and they were not violating one of the 10 Commandments. Now that's a contradiction if I've ever heard one, but African Americans were given Christianity as a means of socializing them, calming them down so that they would not revolt against their Christian masters who sold them and raped them and inflicted terror on them. So I understand very clearly that religion is a powerful tool that can liberate the mind and spirit of people, but when used by the wrong people for nefarious reasons, it can hold a people in suspended animation.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Watching our history. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Watching our history unravel itself, meaning that watching it from an African perspective, our history unravel itself, we get to the core of who we are as a people. We can then unwrap centuries, the centuries of conditioning on our mindset. So that's why I said we're going to slow roast African history now when we start dealing with ancient Kemet. We're going to slow roast it. Let's continue. Thank y'all. One love, Karima. Thank you, Adrian. Let's go.
Let me share this,
and
please.
destroy their lives.
I went to Baltimore to the Blacks in Wax Museum there.
Yes.
There is a slavery exhibit, and it shows the horrors of slavery. The foot cut off, the castration, the chains, the beatings, and the rest. And when we left out, someone really near and dear to my heart, very, very close to me, he said that when he was trying to grapple with the barbaric nature of slavery, he is very much a church-going Christian.
Sure.
So we were having a discussion about it all. And so what he offered was, he said, but many of the slaves were Christian. And so they were rewarded in the afterlife.
Right.
I don't know what he's about to say in terms of rewarding in the afterlife, but I'm going to say this, so you need to see African spirituality class after this. There is no place in African spirituality where we focus on the afterlife. There is no foundation for the future. That doesn't work. It's either the Zamani or the Sasa, the now, or learning from the history of your past. They do not discuss here and after. It's not even in the cosmology of spirituality, right? That's so that's all European. I don't know what the brother's about to say, but that hit. And so also understanding history from a African perspective unleashes what we've been teaching and talking about in Alkebulan Inspirational Sunday, as well as the African Speaks, is the God particle. The God particle, the melanin, the makeup, the genetic makeup of who we are. So you want to talk about how are we able to get through all of that? You got to click into a lot of these other areas of classes in which what we're teaching, because it gives you a full picture. Not one stream can give you the complete answer. Multiple sessions. And that's why I offer it out to the community. We're starting a new show called All Black Everything. And so we want to make sure that y'all come and watch that too. So whoever has a voice in the world who needs to speak so that we can get this African-centered learning process moving. Let's go. I'm loving this right now.
Well, that's a false narrative that was created in the early 19th century in order to pacify black folk. And we need to do a show just on that discussion.
Right.
One of the reasons why we are as we are as a people is because false narratives have been imposed upon us, and we keep referring to these false narratives and expecting positive results. And you'll never get positive results as long as you internalize a lie. So this whole idea,
so on some level, on some level, if it wasn't a justification, it was saying, okay, they caught hell here, but in the by and by.
But look, but that's a lie, and that lie was created by a pastor in Georgia named Reverend C.C. Jones. He wrote that narrative in order to keep black people pacified. He introduced the process of Christianizing Africans, where European enslavers then began the process of giving enslaved Africans Sundays off so that they could be taught these false narratives in order to pacify them. So logic dictates.
That is a whole show in and of itself.
It is, but logic dictates if black folk are supposed to suffer peacefully and receive our reward in heaven, why doesn't that apply to white folk?
Woo! Okay, he said a mouthful. And then how come we can't see that? And the reason why we can't see that is because we're not focusing from an African perspective in terms of thinking, right? Pacify, pacify, pacify. What would you need to pacify people for? If they understood who they are in God. Because every now and then, that God particle, that melanin, that pineal gland will vibrate at a particular frequency where you understand that there is more to you than what someone outside your race is telling you. Unless they're giving you praise in the sight of God. Woo. You already know that I can't see anybody who's giving black folk praise in the sight of God according to what we brought to the world and it liberating us. Let's get it. And like you said, that's a whole discussion within itself. I think we tackled that during the African Speaks one night. We might have to do that one again. Let's continue.
You know, why are white folk going all over the world, bombing everybody in a heartbeat, avenging every murder? Why don't they believe in peace? Why don't they believe? So that's another show, and we need to talk about that because this is important for us to understand who we are and how we've been taught to hate ourselves and not defend ourselves in the present moment, but expect to receive benefits in the great by and by. No other people subscribe to that. The Jews certainly don't subscribe to that, you know. But let's get back to this Asar and Heru piece for a minute, because after Heru was born, and there are some scholars who say that Heru was born 6,000 years ago on December the 25th. So it adds another layer to that Jesus story. But he was born to avenge the murder of his father. And as an adult, Heru defeated his uncle and reclaimed his father's throne. And at the moment he reclaimed his father's throne, he was transformed into a falcon, flew into heaven to meet his father Asar, told his father of his victory over Set, and then he came back to Egypt to rule in his father's absence. Now, when he came
Now, before they continue, what I want to add is the fact that he's talking about the mythology of the faith coming out of Kemet, the Maya. And every faith has its own sacred mythology. And so he's explaining the mythology. Now, this is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years before Christianity. Way before Christianity was on the planet. And they're showing you how, if you listen to the stories, how Christianity borrowed from one of the most powerful empires on the planet, which is Kemet. Borrowed ancient myth stories to help define the things that man can't define. Let's continue.
Came back to Egypt, there was this image that represented the victorious Heru called the Heru Bedet, a winged sun disk that was carved above the entrance to every temple in ancient Egypt to represent Heru's victory over Set and reclaiming his father's kingdom. And at the moment Heru reclaimed his father's throne, his father Asar was resurrected from the dead and became the Lord of Judgment. And then the symbol that we now call the Washington Monument was created by Heru to represent the resurrection of his father. So that is the oldest symbol of resurrection known to man. So if we deal with history, then we can look at architectural symbols and put them in a historical, cultural, and religious context and begin to orient ourselves to a correct historical and cultural perspective. So why don't we know this?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Please, let me keep interrupting you here.
Okay.
So, somewhere it said that on Friday, he was buried. And on Sunday, they went and the stone was removed and he was gone.
Right.
That is eerily similar to what I just heard you describe.
Before we continue, again, certain stories were borrowed from the greatest empire that had been on this planet. So that to mirror image the greatness of that particular empire and what it would build. This is as powerful as all outdoors. Let us continue. Wow.
Yes, it is. And the reason why it's similar, and on my last show when I was here in February, I talked about Eusebius. We talked about how Eusebius took these African stories and Europeanized them and created a new narrative, which they then gave to all of the people that they conquered as a new belief system. So that's part of the process that
A new belief system. You're giving a new belief to a people who had a history of verbal communication of ancient African wisdoms. So you take ancient African stories, change them, and after you change them, you give it back to an African people who had their own African history, who had an image of them and their own personal greatness. And you give it to them in a way that changes their perception of themselves. We're going to slow roast this thing when we get into Kemet because we want to understand that everything about this empire, and we also know that, let me say, everything about this empire is used in modern society. Now we also know, and I don't want you to forget, that Kemet is a daughter of Cush, right? So we already know because we've been in African history class for a while. Kemet was not the most powerful. It was Cush. It wasn't even the largest. It was Cush. They didn't want to teach you about Cush because it was deeper into the center of the continent of Africa, right? So they only used Kemet at the edge. So Cush was as powerful and as great and as influential as everything else, right? And so we're going to slow roast this thing. So guys, I want you to get this because as you start learning about the kings and the cultures and everything else, I want you to be able to see how much of our culture is mixed in to the myths of modern society.
Talking about, but I'm laying it out
Yeah.
in historical
Yeah,
context,
historical and
so
chronological.
that it
Okay.
makes sense. So essentially, what happened, and this will help to further illustrate this thread that we're weaving, is that when the Greeks conquered Kemet in 332 BC, they Hellenized Asar, Aset, and Heru.
Hellenized. What does that mean?
Um, um, Hellenic society is Greek society.
Okay.
Okay. So to the Greeks, Asar became known as Osiris, Aset became known as Isis, and Heru became known as Horus. And so the story of Aset the virgin and her child Heru became known to the Greeks as Isis and Horus, and then later became known as the Madonna and Child.
Woo! Did he just drop that one? Woo! Hey, I don't know who's listening. I'm sorry y'all going crazy because that just hit the spot. He walked it down to you. Walked it down to you so that you could understand how it goes from Kemet to Greece to Greece to modern day and how the name changed according to the culture who was ruling and gave it back to the people and said, this is what you're gonna be. This is who you're gonna be. Ain't that something? Now we know we're the Madonna and Child in terms of the mythology of sacred mythology of Christianity comes from. Wow. So when people are arguing, oh, it's fake, it's fake, it's phony, whether it is or isn't, it's still sacred mythology. But we also got to understand that it's not the only sacred piece of data out there. As Africans, every culture has what is called sacred mythology. But we're studying the fact that Kemet's sacred mythology was stolen, rewritten, and given back to us so that we don't see ourselves in the development of the world's one of the world's greatest empires. Let's continue. We got time.
Yeah. So after the Romans conquered the Greeks in 32 BC, the Romans then absorbed all of this Greek knowledge and then Latinized it, which is their language, Latin. And so the Madonna and Child, or Isis and Horus, the Madonna and Child, became known to the Greeks. When they began to promote Christianity as a state religion, they became known as Mary and Jesus. So if we look at the icons of Aset and Heru, of Isis and Horus, and of Mary and Jesus, you see that those icons are identical. We see in all of those images that will be on the screen on this show, you'll see that the child is sitting on the left lap of the mother and suckling from the left breast. So these are iconic images that began in Kemet over 6,000 years ago and were absorbed into Greek culture, then absorbed into Roman culture, and presented to the world as their own creation. Now,
Wow. We slow roasting this thing, y'all. Wow. I don't know how many Christians I just hurt feelings. but we're not getting our feelings hurt. Don't take it personal. We don't mean to shake your spiritual awareness. What we mean to do is deepen it. Deepen it to make you realize that they wanted everything that we are. And they rewrote what we gave so that it embodied what they were trying to do for them. But we now have to take things in our own hands and rewrite Christian faith, rewrite Islam, rewrite all of it according to the truth of who we are and how we see ourselves in God. This is powerful. Yeah, I see you, Adrian, with that. Wow, this is. I hope your mom not watching. Let's continue.
I've been to the Vatican Museum, and there are dozens of images of Set and Heru in the Vatican Museum. There are dozens of images of Isis and Horus in the Vatican Museum. There are dozens of images of Mary and Jesus in the Vatican Museum. So it's one seamless narrative, same personalities, just reinterpreted through a different cultural lens.
Reinterpreted through a different cultural lens. That's important, because if you allow some other culture to interpret your history, you don't see who you are, you see who they choose you to be. They steal away your consciousness. We got to give the culture back to where it belongs. These are an African people. These are African stories. These are African spiritual disciplines and signs. This is who we are. This is who we are. Let's continue.
Now, there's a very important painting, a mural by the name of, painted by a man by the name of Edwin Long in 1883. And it's a painting of Mary, Joseph, and Jesus arriving into Egypt. So right after Jesus was born, they had to flee Jerusalem and come into Egypt to hide in Egypt, to hide among the black people.
Hide in the land of Kemet.
All right, hide in the land of Kemet. All right,
Here we
so
go.
this is around the year
The definition
zero.
of Kemet is
The black
Egypt.
land, or the land of the black people.
Come on.
blonde, blue-eyed little kid. Among all these real black people.
Which says something about what the color of his eyes and hair and skin might have really
Might have
been.
really
Right?
been.
But that's another
Come on.
story. But in this painting, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus arriving into Egypt, we see this white Mary, Joseph, and Jesus riding on a donkey coming into Egypt. And in the background, we see a ceremony of Isis and Horus. We see now the Romans celebrating this ancient Kemetic tradition. And you see in the background Isis and Horus being carried on a bark, which represent the same figure as Mary and Jesus
Joseph
coming
on the
into
donkey.
Egypt. So from an iconic standpoint, you see a merging of images, a merging, a divergence of cultures. But if you have a historical and cultural perspective, you will know that both of those images,
Represent
the
the same
European
thing.
image and the Greek image, refer back to an African original image. So that helps anybody who wants to ground themselves in knowledge of self to begin to reorient yourself to a historical and foundational truth that sets the stage for us beginning to learn to love ourselves.
You're never going to get invited on Fox News.
Stop that. You never get invited on Fox News. You're never getting invited to Fox News. This is powerful, y'all. As we begin to find who we are in God, as we begin to take a look at what ancient Kemet was, we take a look at the religious aspects of it, because we're going to also take a look at how the Mayat, which is the spiritual practices of a people that created the culture, created civilization. It's the communal balance of a people that were able to create such great things that they offered out to modern civilization, that modern civilization still use. So we're going to slow roast this thing, because as we learn about this particular history, and I didn't slow roast Kush. But we're going to slow roast Kemet, because this way that you can't undo the fact that as you go through life and you study history, you're going to be able to see images of Kemet in everything that you do. As long as you study history and every mathematics, you can study science, it's all going to have a birthplace of the African continent. Let's continue.
thank goodness. And that's why I'm always glad to come back to the Brock Newman Show, all right? So as we look at the trace, now I talked in my first show, we talked about how Eusebius um, um, Christianized African concepts, and then they banned the religious teachings of ancient Kemet. So around the 4th century AD, the ability to read hieroglyphics or Medu Neter, the ability to teach this information was outlawed by the new Roman Empire state. So the Romans then could take this information and present it as a historical truth. And then they began to build, later on, they began to build churches and cathedrals all throughout Europe. So this information of this new narrative was incorporated into these structures, but the operative masons who built these temples, some of them knew of this earlier story, and they would incorporate into the construction of these buildings some of these ancient references. And then you had speculative masons, philosophers, who began to study these ancient texts, ancient African texts, and they found that that was the foundation of European knowledge, and they began to teach this information, which literally helped to bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. But they were repressed by the church and were forced to go underground in their free Masonic lodges.
Now, it was always mentioned in terms of Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, all those individuals who developed what we call wisdom. You know, that the wisdom of the philosophy. They all studied in Africa. They all studied in the mystery temples. And it is also historical knowledge that when they took that information back to Greece and Rome, it wasn't well received because they were teaching a foreign doctrine. And so when you're teaching a foreign doctrine, you're teaching something from Kemet, from the land of the blacks. No, of course they go at it. And that's also, well, we can't, how are we going to bring wisdom to our people that is the wisdom of another people, another race, another group? It makes it hard. It makes it hard until you mask it and you make it look like it came from you. And then you become what the world says, you become geniuses. This is one of the reasons why we have these fraternities, these Greek fraternities, because they were supposed to be the body of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, which is all fake. And so I always tell people who want to embrace these quote unquote fraternities, we should have had a reformation years ago, where we stop calling ourselves Greeks and call them Kemetic societies, right? Where you're not connecting to these fraternities that give you something from another culture, but you're trying to find a way to define yourself in it. Shake all that loose and develop Kemetic societies where we connect ourselves directly back to the history where the wisdom truly came from. We got a few more minutes.
So you have the spread of secret knowledge throughout Europe, France, Germany, England, and then it ultimately makes its way into the United States, into the colonies. And so you find that Freemasonry served as the foundation for where European Masons could study African knowledge, and this served to inspire them to revolt against the King of England. So in American Masonic texts, we find that the Boston Tea Party was a revolt that was conceived within a Masonic lodge by Masons who decided that they were going to throw the tea off of the ship in Boston Harbor, disguise themselves as Native Americans, but they were formulating the stage of a revolt. And once the colonies decided to break away from England, you had Freemasons who were in the forefront of this movement. George Washington, many of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were Masons. All 33 of the generals who fought in the Revolutionary War were Masons, and they were led by the Masonic leader, George Washington, who said that he would not have any man under his command who was not a member of the craft. So Masonry served as the core and foundation of the creation of the United States of America. If we look at the U.S. Constitution, many of the writers of the U.S. Constitution were Masons. And if we look at Article 1, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution, when they determined the process by which they were going to establish a capital for this new nation, they stated specifically in Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution that this new capital would be no larger than a 10-mile square. That's the specific language. And now, in Masonic terms, a square is a foundation upon which a man, a person coming into the Masonic Lodge takes his oath, the process for beginning a new life. Within operative Masonry, a square is a foundation stone upon which a building would rest. So then it made sense for the Masonic founding fathers of this country to determine that the capital of this new nation will be in the shape of a square 10 miles on either side, because symbolically, metaphorically, it was going to be the cornerstone of this new nation and the foundation stone upon which new states would be added to the United States of America. So it's from that framework that we can begin to look at why Egypt was built on the Potomac River. Because the Masonic founding fathers of the United States believed that they were continuing the legacy of Osiris and Horus.
Wow, that is a mouthful. I knew about the Masonic temple. I knew about what was the information came from ancient African knowledge and wisdom and understanding. How much it was mixed into uh, Europeanized movements for the manifestation of their own country and their own state. I didn't know. I was just educated to something even deeper than what I thought I knew. And with this, that's enough to slow down this slow stew. We're going to bring the fire down just a little bit, and we're going to let that simmer in your spirit and in your mind as we slow roast our way into understanding the influence of the Kemetic Empire of Kemet. We're going to get that. We're going to slow roast our way all the way to our complete understanding, because once this is done, and I don't know how long it's going to take, because in the Africans, we ain't dealing with the chronological time. We're going to go with the time of the season. When this is done, then this is done. You will know who you are, where you come from, and why we're here and where we're going. Let us take another look at, and again, he's dealing with the issue of architectonics, the spiritual foundation of the architecture of Egypt, and then how it reflects everything else and how they used it. You can see the architectonics. Every culture has its own architectonics, the style of creating buildings. And so you can see how the US and other places pulled from the wisdom and understanding of an ancient wisdom of Kemet. Take a look at this and let it know, let it feel yourself in this development of, or the rise of this culture, and know that this is where we came from, so this is where we're going. This was our Wakanda then. I can't wait to see the highly technological black world that will be our Wakanda to be. One love.